Who is Lilith? Lilith is one of the most mysterious and controversial figures in the history of religion and mythology. Unlike Eve, whose story is told clearly in the Bible, Lilith's presence is fragmented, veiled in shadows, and woven from ancient myths, commentaries, and folklore. Yet across centuries, her image has endured, sometimes as a demoness of the night, other times as a rebellious woman who refused to submit, and in modern times as a symbol of independence and feminine power. The question of Lilith's origin is deeply tied to the earliest chapters of the book of Genesis. In Genesis 1:27 it is written, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." This verse suggests that both man and woman were created at the same time. Many scholars and interpreters believe this may refer not to Eve, but to an earlier woman, Lilith. Yet in Genesis 2:18-23, we read a different story. "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." 2:18, "So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh." 2:21, "Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man." 2:22, "The man said, 'This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man.'" 2:23. Here, Eve is described as being formed from Adam's rib, but this raises a profound question. If Genesis 1 says male and female were created together, and Genesis 2 says woman was created from Adam's rib, are we reading about two different women? If so, who was the first, and what became of her? According to Hebrew mythology and later rabbinic tradition, that first woman was Lilith. She was created at the same time as Adam, from the same earth, though some texts suggest her creation was less pure. God created Lilith from filth and sediment, while Adam was formed from pure dust. Because of this difference, conflict arose between them. Lilith refused to submit to Adam's authority, claiming equality because they were both created from the earth. When Adam rejected her stance, she chose exile over subordination. Though the canonical Bible does not explicitly name her, Lilith is hinted at in the Hebrew scriptures. In Isaiah 34:14, the Hebrew word Lilith appears in a prophecy of desolation. "The wild animals shall meet with hyenas, the goat demon shall call to his fellow, there too Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest." Some translations render Lilith as screech owl or night creature, but in Jewish folklore it became a direct reference to Lilith, a spirit of the night. This mysterious verse deepened her association with darkness, wilderness, and danger. Even earlier than the Hebrew Bible, Lilith's shadow stretches back into ancient Mesopotamian civilization. In Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts, spirits, known as Lilatu, were described as female night demons who brought storms, disease, sexual temptation, and infant death. Archaeologists have uncovered amulets from nearly 4,000 years ago, inscribed with prayers to ward off these spirits, showing that people genuinely feared them. It is from these ancient roots that the Jewish concept of Lilith likely evolved, transforming her from a vague night demon into Adam's rebellious first wife. Her story, therefore, is not just a tale about one woman. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's oldest fears and desires: fear of the night, of female power, of rebellion against divine or social order. At the same time, Lilith also embodies the longing for independence and dignity, even in the face of condemnation. In religious texts, she is condemned. In folklore, she is feared. In modern times, she has been reimagined as a heroine. Her legend has survived precisely because it embodies contradiction, both demon and liberator, curse and symbol of freedom. Understanding Lilith's story is not merely about uncovering a forgotten myth. It is about tracing how spiritual traditions, gender roles, and cultural anxieties have shaped human history. From the Gardens of Eden to the deserts of Isaiah, from Babylonian demons to Kabbalistic mysticism, Lilith has walked beside us in shadow for millennia. Mesopotamian roots. To understand Lilith, we must go back to one of the earliest cradles of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia. Long before her name appeared in Jewish folklore, echoes of Lilith can be found in the myths, spells, and religious traditions of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. In these cultures, she was not yet the rebellious wife of Adam, but a more shadowy, dangerous spirit of the night, the Lilitu spirits. The first known references to Lilith-like beings appear in Sumerian texts nearly 4,000 years ago. The term Lilitu was used to describe female wind or night spirits associated with storms, darkness, and illness. They were considered dangerous, especially to infants and pregnant women, and were believed to haunt desolate places. In Akkadian tradition, related figures like Ardat Lili and Urdu Lili appear, female demons who seduce men at night, drain their vitality, or cause infertility in women. These were not just stories told for entertainment. They reflected very real fears of ancient societies, where infant mortality was high and unexplained illnesses were often blamed on unseen supernatural forces. Lamashtu and the Demon Mother. One of the most powerful figures connected to Lilith's early image is Lamashtu, a terrifying Mesopotamian demon goddess. Lamashtu was said to prowl at night, attacking mothers and newborns, drinking their blood and bringing disease. She was often depicted with a lioness's head, a woman's body, and the claws of a bird of prey. To protect against her, families would place amulets in their homes, inscribed with prayers and symbols. These amulets sometimes mention Lilitu alongside Lamashtu, suggesting that Lilith and her kind belonged to a larger group of female night spirits feared by the Mesopotamians. The Bernie relief. One of the most famous pieces of ancient Mesopotamian art that scholars connect to Lilith is the Bernie relief, also known as the Queen of the Night relief, dating back to around 1800 BCE. It shows a winged goddess or demon with bird-like talons, flanked by owls and lions. Some researchers argue that this figure might represent Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, but others suggest it could depict Lilith or a Lilitu demon. The presence of owls, birds often associated with the night, and with Lilith in later traditions, makes this a compelling possibility. Whether or not it truly represents her, the relief shows how female night spirits held a powerful place in Mesopotamian belief, fear, and protection. For ancient people, Lilith was not just a myth, but a danger to be actively guarded against. Archaeologists have uncovered incantation bowls and protective charms inscribed with prayers to drive away Lilith and her demonic kind. These bowls often contained the names of angels or deities, forming a spiritual barrier against her. One inscription reads something like, "Bound is Lilith, who torments children, who flees from the angels of protection." Such objects reveal that Lilith's earliest role was that of a feared predator of the vulnerable. She was a spirit of the margins, the deserts, the ruins, the shadows of the night, from demoness to archetype. Over time, Lilith became more than just one among many demons. She took on a symbolic identity as the ultimate night spirit, the embodiment of fear, desire, and danger. In Mesopotamian culture, where fertility and survival were central concerns, Lilith represented the ever-present threat to life, love, and family. This early image laid the foundation for everything that followed. When Jewish scribes and storytellers later encountered Mesopotamian traditions, they absorbed and reshaped Lilith's legend. She evolved from a nameless night spirit into a complex character, Adam's rebellious wife, the mother of demons, the eternal tempter, the legacy of the Lilitu. The Mesopotamian Lilitu and Lamashtu remind us that Lilith's story is older than the Bible, older even than written Hebrew tradition. She was born in the ancient fears of humanity, the fear of the dark, of death in childbirth, of illness without explanation, of sexuality uncontrolled. In this world, Lilith was not just a figure of myth, but a living presence people warded off, with charms and prayers. She haunted the edges of civilization, embodying both the destructive and seductive forces of the night. As we move forward in this journey, we will see how these ancient shadows followed her into later traditions, transforming her from a feared spirit of Mesopotamia into one of the most infamous figures in Jewish folklore. Lilith in the alphabet of Ben Sira. While Lilith's earliest identity emerged in Mesopotamian myths, her most famous and enduring story comes from a Jewish text written over 1,000 years later. This tale is preserved in the alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval satirical text dating to around the 8th–10th century CE. Though not considered sacred scripture, it shaped how generations came to view Lilith, not merely as a wandering demon, but as Adam's first wife, created as Adam's equal. According to the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith was created at the same time as Adam, from the same dust of the earth. Unlike Eve, who was later formed from Adam's rib, Lilith's origin placed her on equal footing with the first man. This equality, however, soon became the source of conflict. When Adam and Lilith lay together, Lilith refused to accept the position of lying beneath Adam. She argued, "Why should I lie beneath you? I am your equal, for we were both created from the earth." Adam disagreed, insisting on his dominance. Their union turned into a battle of wills, revealing Lilith's defining trait, her refusal to submit, a feminine counterpart. The story of Lilith in the alphabet of Ben Sira also introduces a powerful contrast between her and Eve. Where Eve was created to be Adam's helper, Lilith demanded equality. Where Eve is remembered as the one who led Adam into temptation, Lilith is remembered as the one who refused to accept his authority at all. For medieval readers, Lilith was a warning. A woman who defied her husband would bring destruction. But for modern interpreters, her defiance has been reimagined as an act of courage and independence. This duality explains why Lilith remains such a contested and fascinating figure. Lilith's departure from Eden. When Lilith fled Eden, the Garden of Beauty and Order gave way to wilderness and chaos. In leaving behind Adam, she also left behind divine harmony, choosing instead a path that would forever cast her as both outcast and symbol. The tale of her departure is one of both tragedy and empowerment, shaping the way generations would understand her role in the world. The breaking of Eden, according to Hebrew mythology. Thereupon, God created the first woman, Lilith, just as he had created Adam. However, unlike Adam, he used filth and sediment instead of pure earth. Because of this difference in creation, conflict arose with Lilith, and they, Adam and Lilith, could never be together. In the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith's departure was not a quiet one. Her rebellion shattered the perfect image of Eden. Adam remained behind, mourning and angered by her defiance. His loneliness echoed through the garden, which until then had known only peace. For Adam, her absence was not just personal, it was a wound to the cosmic order. This is significant. In Jewish mysticism, Eden was meant to be a place of perfect balance. Man and woman were created to reflect divine harmony. By walking away, Lilith broke that balance. Her refusal to submit introduced disharmony, marking the first fracture in creation itself. The Red Sea and exile, Lilith's flight, carried her to the shores of the Red Sea, a region often described in Jewish tradition as a dwelling place of demons. Unlike Eden, with its lush gardens and golden rivers, the Red Sea represented danger, death, and the unknown. Here, Lilith made her new home. From this wilderness, she began to redefine herself, not as Adam's partner, but as something entirely other. It was here that she embraced her darker nature, mating with wandering spirits and giving birth to countless demonic offspring. In folklore, this daily birthing of demons represented both an untamed fertility and a curse upon humanity. Lilith, who once might have borne children within Eden, instead became the mother of beings that haunted the night, spread sickness, and preyed on the vulnerable. The angels mission Adam, grieving her loss and feeling the weight of imbalance, pleaded with God. In response, God dispatched 3 angels, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjalov, to bring her back. The angels found Lilith among the waves of the Red Sea, surrounded by her spirit children. They commanded her to return to Eden, warning that refusal would cost her dearly. Hundreds of her children would die each day as punishment. Lilith's reply was striking. She did not deny the threat. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she stood firm, choosing freedom over obedience. Her words carried both pain and defiance. She would not return to Adam's side, no matter the cost. The oath and the amulet, though she refused to return, Lilith offered a pact. She swore that whenever she encountered children protected by the names of the three angels, she would do them no harm. This agreement gave rise to one of the most enduring folk practices in Jewish tradition, the use of protective amulets. Parents would inscribe the angels' names on charms and place them near cradles to safeguard their infants from Lilith's grasp. The fact that such rituals persisted for centuries shows the power her legend held in the cultural imagination. Lilith's oath also highlights her duality. She was both destroyer and protector, capable of inflicting harm, but bound by honor when faced with divine names. The transformation of Lilith with this pact, Lilith's departure from Eden, was sealed. She was no longer simply Adam's lost partner. She had become something new, a liminal figure dwelling between worlds, neither wholly human nor entirely divine, feared yet respected. Her departure marked the end of her role as the first wife, but the beginning of her myth as the mother of demons. From this point on, her identity would no longer be tied to Adam, but to the night, the wilderness, and the untamed forces that resist order. Symbolism of her departure, Lilith's choice to leave Eden has been interpreted in many ways. To traditional commentators, it was rebellion against divine authority, a warning about the dangers of pride and disobedience. To mystics, it revealed a hidden truth about the balance of masculine and feminine forces. Where Adam represented order, Lilith embodied chaos. Both were part of creation, but only one remained in Eden. To modern readers, her departure has often been reclaimed as a symbol of female independence, the refusal to accept subjugation, even if it leads to exile. Her flight was not simply a departure from a place. It was the beginning of her transformation into an eternal symbol, the first being to walk away from paradise in pursuit of freedom, no matter the consequences. The shadow beyond the garden. From that day on, Lilith never returned to Eden. Adam was later given Eve, who was made from his rib to ensure her obedience. But the memory of Lilith lingered. In the whispers of the night, in the shadows by a newborn's crib, in the charms hung above doors, her presence endured. Lilith's departure was not just a story of loss. It was the origin of a myth that would spread across cultures and centuries, inspiring fear, caution, and later admiration. By leaving Eden, she ensured she would never be forgotten. Lilith in Jewish mysticism. After her exile from Eden, Lilith's legend did not end. In fact, it grew more complex and symbolic. While earlier traditions cast her as a demoness who haunted newborns and the vulnerable, Jewish mysticism, particularly the Kabbalistic tradition, wove her into a vast cosmology of light and shadow. Here, she was no longer only Adam's rebellious first wife, but an integral part of the spiritual struggle between holiness and impurity, the world of Kabbalah and duality. Kabbalah teaches that creation is built upon a balance between opposing forces, light and darkness, order and chaos, holiness and impurity. Nothing exists without its counterpart. Just as Adam had Eve, so too did the forces of chaos have Lilith. Within this mystical worldview, Lilith was no longer simply a demoness by the Red Sea. She became the queen of the night, ruler of the demonic feminine energies that opposed divine order. She embodied the Sitra Akra, the other side, the realm of impurity that mirrored the holy world, feeding off its vitality like a shadow consumes light. Lilith and Samael. One of the most striking developments in Jewish mysticism was Lilith's union with Samael, the archangel often associated with Satan, destruction, or the angel of death. Together, they were described as the dark mirror of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve represented life, fertility, and divine blessing. Samael and Lilith represented sterility, temptation, and corruption. The two pairs existed in tension, embodying the eternal struggle between holiness and sin, creation and destruction. Just as Eve bore the children of humanity, Lilith was said to birth demons, spirits, and forces of misfortune. This union between Lilith and Samael highlighted her role as not merely a wanderer from Eden, but a queen of shadow, a partner in cosmic rebellion. The four Liliths Kabbalistic texts even speak of multiple aspects of Lilith, sometimes called the four Liliths. These were not separate beings, but different manifestations of her power. The maiden Lilith associated with seduction and lust. The bride Lilith, tied to forbidden unions and spiritual corruption. The widow Lilith, a bringer of sorrow, grief and loss. The old Lilith, connected with death, decay, and the end of life. These aspects reveal how deeply her image was tied to the human experience of fear and temptation. Each stage of life could encounter a different face of Lilith, from youthful passion to the sorrow of loss, the night demon. Lilith's name became synonymous with the night. In mystical texts, she roamed during the darkest hours, whispering temptations, sowing discord between spouses, and appearing in men's dreams to steal their strength. Her association with dreams and desire tied her to the idea of incubi and succubi, demons that drain energy through lust. But unlike nameless spirits, Lilith had identity, story, and power. She was not just a creature of the night, she was its ruler, protective practices. The fear of Lilith grew so strong in Jewish communities that protective practices became widespread. Amulets bearing the names of the three angels, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Semangelof, were placed in homes, cradles, and beds. Some prayers were spoken before sleep to drive her away. And yet, in the mystical imagination, Lilith was not entirely evil. She was necessary. Without her, there would be no tension, no struggle, no reason for humans to choose righteousness. She was both adversary and teacher, reminding the faithful of the dangers of straying from divine order. Lilith as archetype. Beyond her role in myth, Kabbalistic writers saw Lilith as an archetype of unrestrained desire. She symbolized the dangers of passion without holiness, freedom without boundaries, and rebellion without purpose. But for others, especially much later readers, this made her a paradoxical figure. While mystics warned against her, poets and philosophers found in Lilith a symbol of the eternal struggle for freedom, identity, and feminine strength. Legacy in Jewish mysticism. By the height of medieval Jewish mysticism, Lilith was firmly woven into the spiritual fabric of the faith. She was not only a wandering demoness, but a cosmic queen, a shadow bride, and a powerful counterpart to the forces of holiness. Her presence in Kabbalah ensured that she would never fade from memory. Instead, she remained a living part of the imagination, feared, respected, and studied as a reminder that the spiritual world is never one-sided. Where there is light, there will always be shadow. Lilith in medieval folklore. By the time the Middle Ages arrived, Lilith's presence had grown far beyond the sacred texts of rabbis and mystics. Her name traveled across regions, whispered in households, sung in lullabies, and etched into protective charms. What began in ancient Mesopotamia and evolved through Jewish mysticism now seeped into everyday life, shaping folklore, superstition, and the fears of common people. Lilith in daily life. Unlike the lofty language of Kabbalah, medieval, folklore made Lilith's presence personal. She was no longer confined to cosmic battles or divine mythologies. She was believed to lurk in the shadows of homes, barns, and villages. Parents feared that Lilith would steal newborn infants, either to harm them or to replace them with spirit children. Women were warned not to leave their beds unguarded after childbirth, lest Lilith sneak in during the night. Travelers and shepherds believed she wandered along lonely roads, tempting men into ruin. To protect against her, amulets inscribed with angelic names were hung above cradles, and prayers were recited before sleep. In some communities, bowls with protective incantations were buried under thresholds, creating a shield against her entry. The demon bride. Folklore often painted Lilith as a seductress who preyed on men. She was imagined as a beautiful woman with long, flowing hair, her beauty irresistible yet dangerous. Men who encountered her in dreams or in lonely places were said to wake weakened, as though their very life force had been drained. This image of Lilith as a demon bride reinforced fears of sexuality outside marriage, reflecting medieval Society's anxieties about temptation and purity. Where Eve represented the faithful wife, Lilith became the embodiment of the forbidden woman, a presence both feared and desired. The lullabies of fear. Perhaps the most striking survival of Lilith in medieval folklore can be found in lullabies. In Jewish households, mothers would sing songs warning Lilith away from their babies. In these verses, Lilith was addressed directly, sometimes commanded to leave, sometimes pleaded with to spare the child. Such songs show how deeply she had become part of the domestic imagination. She was not a distant myth, but a nightly concern for families, the shadow hovering over the cradle, the reason a mother whispered prayers into the dark. Lilith, in Christian and Islamic folklore. During the Middle Ages, Jewish legends spread into Christian and Islamic traditions as well, often reshaped but carrying familiar echoes. In Christian folklore, Lilith became associated with witches, succubi, and spirits of lust. Some medieval theologians connected her with the figure of the Whore of Babylon, a symbol of sin and corruption. In Islamic tradition, echoes of Lilith appear in tales of jinn and ghoul-like female spirits who haunt deserts and prey on travelers. While the name Lilith is not explicitly used, the archetype of the dangerous night demoness mirrors her form. These cross-cultural echoes reveal how universal her archetype was. The dark feminine, feared yet enduring, passed down from one tradition to another, a symbol of social boundaries. Folklore also reveals how Lilith served as a warning against breaking social and moral boundaries. For women, she symbolized the danger of straying from roles of wife and mother. For men, she embodied the risks of uncontrolled desire and lust. For children, she was the lurking danger of the night. In this sense, Lilith became not only a myth, but a moral figure, teaching lessons through fear and story. Lilith in Renaissance and Enlightenment thought. As Europe moved out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, society began to shift its way of looking at the world. Art, philosophy, and science flourished, and with this intellectual awakening came a renewed interest in old myths and forgotten figures. Among them was Lilith, who emerged once again, this time not only as a figure of fear, but as an object of fascination, beauty, and even rebellion. Lilith in Renaissance artists of the Renaissance drew heavily from biblical and mythological themes. As they rediscovered classical works and blended them with Christian traditions, Lilith appeared in paintings, carvings, and manuscripts. In many depictions of the Garden of Eden, Lilith was sometimes shown as the serpent who tempted Eve. Artists would paint the serpent with the upper body of a woman, long hair, alluring gaze, and serpentine coils. This imagery captured both her beauty and her danger, half woman, half serpent, whispering forbidden truths. Her association with snakes fit well with Renaissance symbolism, where serpents often represented both wisdom and sin. By placing Lilith in Eden as the serpent, artists suggested that humanity's fall was not only about disobedience, but also about the lure of knowledge and forbidden desire. A muse for poets and writers. While theologians still treated Lilith with suspicion, poets and writers found her irresistible. To them, she was not merely a demoness, but an archetype of the dangerous beauty, the femme fatale who drew men toward passion and ruin. Renaissance poetry celebrated the tension between purity and temptation, often personifying temptation in the form of a woman. Lilith, already known as a seductress, became a ready symbol. She was compared to sirens of the sea, enchantresses of legend, and figures like Medea and Circe from Greek mythology. The rise of humanist thought also gave Lilith a new role, as a woman who defied authority. Some writers quietly admired her refusal to submit, even if they cloaked it in cautionary tales. In this way, Lilith began her long journey toward being seen not only as a demon, but as a symbol of independence, the occult revival. The Renaissance also brought with it a surge of interest in occult knowledge. Alchemists, mystics, and philosophers studied old Jewish texts, including the Kabbalah, and found Lilith woven into its mysteries. She was often invoked in magical writings, either as a spirit to ward off or as a force to harness. In grimoires, the magical manuals of the time, Lilith's name sometimes appeared in spells of protection, love, or seduction. She was seen as a powerful entity of the night, ruling over dreams, desires, and illusions. Her association with owls, snakes, and the moon deepened, connecting her to the broader web of magical symbolism. While the Church condemned such practices, the very secrecy of these texts helped preserve her legend, keeping her alive in the underground world of mystics and magicians, Lilith in Enlightenment thought. By the time of the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, reason and science began to dominate European thought. Superstitions about demons and night spirits were dismissed by many intellectuals. Yet Lilith did not disappear. Instead, she transformed once more. Philosophers and early feminists began to reinterpret her story. To some, Lilith represented the struggle of women against patriarchal authority. Her refusal to obey Adam was reimagined not as sin, but as a bold act of independence. In a world where women were often denied education and political voice, Lilith became a hidden icon of resistance. At the same time, she still haunted popular imagination. While rational thinkers tried to dismiss her, artists and poets continued to evoke her as a symbol of desire, danger, and the untamed forces of nature. A dual legacy. The Renaissance and Enlightenment gave Lilith a new dual identity. To artists and poets, she was the eternal enchantress, beautiful yet deadly, the woman who could not be tamed. To mystics and occultists, she was a powerful spirit of the night, feared and invoked in equal measure. To early feminists and free thinkers, she was an unwilling rebel, a woman punished for asserting equality. This duality, demoness and muse, danger and inspiration, allowed her legend to grow stronger, adapting to the changing currents of thought. The stage is set. By the close of the Enlightenment, Lilith had survived thousands of years of retelling. From Sumerian demoness to Jewish folklore, from medieval lullabies to Renaissance art, she had shifted and transformed with each era. And as the modern world dawned, she was ready to emerge again, this time not just as a shadow, but as a symbol to be embraced. Lilith in Romanticism and Victorian literature. The 19th century was a time of passion, imagination, and mystery. Romanticism swept through Europe and America, rejecting the cold rationalism of the Enlightenment and celebrating nature, dreams, emotions, and the supernatural. In this fertile ground of poetry and art, Lilith was reborn once again, no longer confined to dusty manuscripts or whispered folk tales, but painted in vivid colors on the canvas of literature and imagination. Lilith and the rise of the femme fatale. The Romantics were fascinated by extremes, beauty and terror, love and death, passion and destruction. Few figures captured this duality better than Lilith. In Romantic thought, Lilith became a symbol of the femme fatale, the dangerously beautiful woman who lured men to their doom. She was the woman who embodied desire, yet brought ruin, the flame that both illuminated and consumed. To poets, she was the perfect muse for exploring the tension between love and mortality. Her long, flowing hair became one of her most defining features in this era. Hair was often linked to sexuality and enchantment, and Lilith's became a weapon of seduction. Writers described her hair as a golden net, a living force that bound men's souls. This image would inspire countless later works of art and literature. The pre-Raphaelite Lilith. Perhaps the most famous image of Lilith from the Victorian period comes from the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, a group of painters and poets who looked back to medieval and early Renaissance themes. They embraced myth, symbolism, and striking imagery, and Lilith fit perfectly into their vision. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, a poet and painter of the movement, immortalized Lilith in both word and image. His painting Lady Lilith depicts her as a beautiful woman with cascading hair, sitting before a mirror as she combs it. In his sonnet accompanying the painting, Rossetti described her as the first woman, more dangerous than Eve, whose beauty ensnares men like a serpent's coils. This portrayal cemented Lilith's place in the Victorian imagination. Not a monster, with wings and claws, but a woman of overwhelming beauty, sensuality, and power. She was no longer simply feared. She was admired, even if dangerously so. Poets and writers of the era. Romantic and Victorian poets frequently turned to Lilith as a theme. She appeared in works of Shelley, Goethe, Rossetti, and later poets, like Robert Browning and George MacDonald. Each portrayed her in slightly different ways, sometimes as a demonic temptress, other times as a tragic, exiled figure. In Goethe's Faust, Lilith appears at the Walpurgis Night's Witches' Sabbath, a spectral presence who enchants with her beauty. She is introduced as Adam's first wife, already a familiar concept to learned audiences of the time. Her association with witchcraft and seduction made her a natural fit for the romantic fascination with forbidden knowledge. Writers of Gothic literature also embraced her. She was connected with vampires, succubi, and other darkly alluring female figures. The Victorians, obsessed with both morality and hidden desire, saw in Lilith a reflection of their own cultural tensions, temptation lurking beneath rigid social norms. Lilith in modern occultism and early feminisms, the 19th century gave way to the 20th. Lilith once again transformed in the imagination of humanity, no longer confined to the role of a demon lurking in the shadows of folklore or the femme fatale. Haunting the canvases of romantic painters, she began to emerge in new movements that sought to redefine spirituality, gender, and power. Both occultists and early feminists found in her a figure who could embody independence, rebellion, and hidden wisdom. Lilith in occult revival movements. The late 19th century was a time of fascination with the occult. Secret societies such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, as well as influential esoteric thinkers like Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, sought to uncover the hidden truths of ancient religions. Within their systems, Lilith was not merely a night demon. She became a symbolic force of the divine feminine and the unconscious power of desire. Occult writings often paired Lilith with other female archetypes such as Isis, Hecate, and Sophia, casting her not only as destructive, but also as a gatekeeper of spiritual knowledge. For some magicians, Lilith represented the moon's darker aspect, the shadow self that had to be confronted in order to achieve balance. Aleister Crowley, known for his provocative spiritual experiments, wrote of Lilith as a figure of temptation and liberation, emphasizing that to reject her entirely was to deny a vital part of human nature. In these interpretations, Lilith became not just a demon to be feared, but a power to be respected, invoked, and understood. Lilith in early feminist thought. While occultists were incorporating Lilith into magical systems, women, in the early feminist movement, began to reinterpret her story in a radical new light. In a world where women were often denied education, political voice, and independence, Lilith's refusal to submit to Adam resonated deeply. Unlike Eve, who was created from Adam's rib, Lilith had been formed from the same earth. Her rejection of submission was therefore a statement of equality at creation. Early feminist writers argued that Lilith was not a monster, but a woman who demanded autonomy and refused to be treated as less than a man. In this retelling, her exile from Eden was no longer a punishment. It was an act of courageous self-determination. To leave paradise rather than live in subservience was, for many feminists, a powerful metaphor for women choosing independence over comfort. Some even saw Lilith as the first feminist, a spiritual ancestor of women who challenged social norms and refused to accept a lesser role. By the early 20th century, Lilith began to appear in feminist essays, literature, and later in art that celebrated her as a symbol of strength, defiance, and freedom. The meeting of occultism and feminism. Interestingly, the paths of occultism and feminism often crossed. Many early women involved in the occult were also advocates of women's rights, seeing in Lilith a powerful symbol for both spiritual and social liberation. The idea of the dark goddess as a source of empowerment began to take hold, paving the way for modern pagan and Wiccan traditions, where Lilith is honored as an embodiment of independence and sexual freedom. Thus, in the early decades of the modern era, Lilith's image underwent yet another transformation. From demoness to muse, from monster to mother of witches, she now began to shine as a symbol of resistance against oppression, spiritual, political, and personal. Lilith in Wicca and Neopagan traditions. As the 20th century progressed and the modern pagan revival took root, Lilith found yet another rebirth. In the circles of Wicca, Neopaganism, and contemporary witchcraft, she was no longer demonized or feared. She was embraced as a goddess, a patroness of independence, sexuality, and feminine power. What had begun as folklore and fear evolved into reverence and invocation, the rise of modern paganism. The mid-20th century witnessed a cultural shift in the West. Disillusioned with rigid dogma and patriarchal religion, many seekers turned to ancient pre-Christian practices for inspiration. Wicca, pioneered by Gerald Gardner in the 1950s, revived witchcraft not as a superstition, but as a spiritual path. The goddess became central to this new tradition, often worshipped alongside the horned god as symbols of balance in nature. It was within this fertile soil that Lilith's legend resurfaced. To many practitioners, Lilith embodied the dark goddess, a figure who stood for personal sovereignty, the embrace of sexuality, and the courage to challenge unjust authority. Unlike earlier depictions of her as a demoness who preyed upon children, modern witches reframed her as a protector of women, outcasts, and seekers of hidden knowledge. Lilith as the dark feminine archetype. Within Neopagan traditions, Lilith often appears as part of the triple goddess archetype, maiden, mother, and crone. She is associated with the crone or dark aspect, representing wisdom, transformation, and shadow work. Yet she is not merely destructive. Rather, she is the one who guides initiates through the darkness of their own fears, so they may emerge reborn. Ritual. Invocations of Lilith often call upon her lunar associations, particularly the dark moon, symbolizing the hidden, the mysterious, and the untamed. To the practitioner, invoking Lilith is an act of courage, a declaration that they are ready to confront the parts of themselves long repressed by society, religion, or their own fears, from demon to divine mother. By the late 20th century, Lilith had fully crossed into the realm of the divine. Artists, poets, and spiritual seekers celebrated her as a mother of witches, a defender of personal freedom, and a patron of those walking non-traditional paths. She became not only a goddess of witches, but also a symbol of resistance against oppression and control, carrying forward the rebellious spirit she had always embodied. Lilith in pop media. As myths evolve, they take on new life in the hearts and minds of each generation. In the modern era, Lilith has not only survived, she has flourished, moving beyond the pages of ancient texts into art, literature, music, and popular culture. Once a figure of fear whispered about in ancient Mesopotamia and demonized in medieval folklore, Lilith has become a cultural icon, one whose meaning shifts depending on who invokes her name. Lilith in popular media. In television, film, and comics, Lilith frequently appears as a character whose role oscillates between villainous and anti-heroine. She surfaces in series such as Supernatural, True Blood, and the chilling adventures of Sabrina, often tied to dark power, temptation, and freedom from divine authority. In the realm of comic books and video games, she is depicted as a sorceress, a vampire queen or a goddess of chaos, always commanding, never submissive. Interestingly, these portrayals reflect society's ongoing struggle with the archetype Lilith represents, the independent woman who refuses to bow to established order. Sometimes she is cast as dangerous, sometimes as liberating, but always as unforgettable. End of story and what comes next. As we close this journey through the many faces of Lilith, we see how her story has changed across time. From a feared night demon in Mesopotamia, to Adam's first wife in Jewish folklore, to a goddess of rebellion in mysticism, to an archetype of independence and empowerment in psychology, Lilith has never disappeared. Instead, she has transformed with every culture that spoke her name. Her story reminds us of something greater, that myths are not just tales of the past, but living mirrors of our deepest fears, desires, and questions. Lilith's refusal to submit, her exile, her role as a mother of spirits, and her eventual transformation into a symbol of hidden strength all show us the power of embracing both shadow and light within ourselves. But Lilith's story does not end here. According to some traditions and mythologies, her legacy continued through the first children of humanity. It is said that Qabil, Cain, was born from Lilith, while Habil, Abel, came from Eve. This sets the stage for one of the oldest and most dramatic human stories, the struggle between brothers, jealousy, and the first tragedy of mankind. In our next video, we will dive deep into the story of Qabil and Habil, exploring the myths, religious texts, and ancient interpretations of how their conflict shaped the destiny of humanity. If you enjoyed this series on Lilith, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of our journey through ancient mysteries. Lilith's tale has ended here, but the story of humanity is just beginning.